Get married already. An ugly, worthless daughter like you should get out as soon as possible. My father hurled these cruel words at me when I was 16. Did I somehow time travel to the past? Unable to argue back, I found myself forced into a marriage with a man I had never met. A loveless, cold marital life began. Inside, only despair spread. Yet, life is unpredictable. I could never have imagined such a turn of events. I am Leona, now 35. I went out to buy Valentine's Day chocolates, but ended up buying chocolates for myself. Then, my husband asked, "What about mine?" I messed up. I had intended to get something for him before entering the store, but I got so caught up in choosing my own chocolates that I completely forgot. Next time, I'll give him a fine wine. Yes, that sounds good. Now, I live a leisurely life in a home filled with love, but staying at home as a child was a painful ordeal. I never felt that way when my sister was little. I have a sister named Alice, who is 2 years younger than me. From infancy, her distinct facial features made everyone excited about her future. Years later, Alice grew into a cute girl that exceeded expectations, and pushed by our mother, she began working as a child model. However, her exposure was limited to brief appearances in local company commercials or side profiles on community event flyers, not exactly a major breakthrough. She was far from being a so-called famous child actor. To my parents, it seemed that any small achievement by my sister was a great source of pride, and they always kept her close like a decorative object, doting on her. At the same time, their interest in me rapidly faded. Perhaps because of a genetic throwback, I had a robust physique much like my grandmother, in stark contrast to my sister, who had a modern look with a small face and long limbs. Furthermore, despite everyone in the family being slim and eating the same meals without any extra snacks, I was the only one with a plump figure. I often wondered, why am I the only one like this? How many times did I envy her appearance, wishing I could look like her? But even as a child, I understood that comparing myself to others was pointless. I am me. I was determined to enhance my strengths, but my parents did not acknowledge my existence. Our first child is a failure in terms of looks and personality. One day, as my parents drunkenly complained about me while drinking in the living room, I accidentally overheard them. Those words stayed in my heart for a long time, making me feel like a failure. My mother, a beautiful lady confident in her looks and maintaining a strong focus on appearance even as she aged, was not just concerned with herself, but also interfered in others' matters. She would scornfully talk about a neighbor who went out to throw away trash early in the morning without makeup, in a t-shirt and sweatpants. This neighbor had quintuplets, and her high-earning husband was hardly ever home. Instead, her mother-in-law often visited, and occasionally there were raised voices. Looking back, I think she must have been enduring harassment. Even as a child, I could see she was always struggling. Is it wrong for someone managing solo parenting and numerous challenges to go out to throw trash in a t-shirt and sweatpants? Surely managing household chores in such circumstances deserves praise. Even as a child, I felt that my mother was unkind and lacked empathy for others. So, while it was painful that she didn't dote on me because she found me unattractive, there was a part of me that understood it. When we were young, my sister started receiving an allowance, but I wasn't given a single dollar. The discrimination became more and more apparent. For example, on days we had soup for dinner, my plate would be piled high with vegetables that my sister didn't like, while her plate was filled with meat. I didn't like those vegetables either. Despite my mother's behavior, my father seemed indifferent, and though my sister must have been aware of the abnormality in our family, it seemed she somewhat enjoyed her advantageous position. There was no one in this house to support me. If my sister broke something, no one would say a word, but if I did the same, I would be strictly scolded and criticized with the excuse that, "You're the older sister." Usually younger siblings might wear hand-me-downs from the older ones, but in our house, It was the reverse clothes my sister outgrew or no longer wanted were passed down to me. As a result, I was always dressed in clothes that were too tight with sleeves and hems too short. Being plumper than others and wearing such tight clothes made me look terrible. My chubby body stood out even more, and at school I was laughed at and always felt embarrassed. Even as my mother forced me to wear clothes that didn't fit, she too would adopt a mocking attitude. Everywhere I went, people would say, "Only your sister is cute," and though I was naturally cheerful, I gradually closed off my heart. Even when with friends, thoughts like, maybe they don't really want to be friends with me, or they just want to be close to my sister, would cross my mind. Now I understand that I was just being negative, but back then, I was caught up in these paranoid thoughts. My thinking became thoroughly negative, and my relationships grew strained. Although my circle of friends gradually dwindled, rather than feeling sad about it, I chose to be alone. I had grown tired of constantly doubting others' emotions when interacting with them. Being alone meant I didn't have to think about anything. During my gloomy middle school years, as high school entrance approached, I was shocked to find out that my parents had not paid my high school entrance fee. Surprisingly, they had never intended to send me to high school. They preferred to spend the money on Alice for her acting and dance lessons instead. After much persuasion, I finally got a promise from them that they would let me attend if I could pass the entrance exam for a state high school. At that time, Alice's entertainment activities were going well, and my mother burdened me with household chores. Squeezing study time between chores, I managed to pass the entrance exam to a state high school. I thought I could finally relax. As a child, I trusted my parents and felt relieved, only to be completely betrayed. Those people were more like strangers who just happened to give birth to me, devoid of any affection. Pay the entrance fee? Did we forget to do that? Even if you go to high school and study, with your face, you can't lead a decent life, so not being able to go to high school isn't a big deal. Without an apology, my mother casually dismissed it, and my father and Alice burst out laughing upon hearing it. By the time I realized the issue with the entrance fee, the payment deadline had passed, and I had to give up on going to high school. Although I had the option to work part-time and save money to enroll the following year, I had no energy left to do so. It felt like I had burned out. Having believed my parents' words and worked hard, I lost the opportunity to go to high school, and I just didn't care anymore. Even if I had a good education, no one would love me. That was all I could think about, even though education and being loved are completely different issues. In my teenage years, I wondered why I was so prone to such negative feelings, while my parents sarcastically said, "Since you can focus on housework, it's good you're not going to high school." I also started to think, maybe that's fine. I had no motivation to work part-time, and I didn't even feel like leaving my parents' house. Looking back, I think I was on the verge of losing my emotional balance. I spent my days just mechanically following my parents' orders. Then one day, out of the blue, my father said, "Tomorrow you'll be 18, right?" "Yes, that's right." I was surprised that my father, who recently showed no interest in me, remembered my birthday. A smile naturally appeared on my face. My birthdays were always ignored, but could it be that this year they might celebrate it? Was it because I had been working hard on the household chores? A small hope began to grow in my heart. And then, "Get married already. An ugly, worthless daughter like you should get out as soon as possible." What? I was stunned by my father's words, delivered as casually as if he were asking me to go to the convenience store. Shock rendered me speechless, and without even looking at me standing there dumbfounded, he added, "Get your marriage registered tomorrow." Wait a minute. What are you talking about? We want to build connections with someone in the entertainment agency to support Alice's career. Apparently, there's someone looking for a bride for his son. But to register the marriage tomorrow. While drinking together, I casually mentioned that my eldest daughter thinks your son is handsome and things progress smoothly from there. Ha 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 ha. As my father spoke cheerfully, I felt an intense hatred like never before. I hadn't even seen this man's face, and here was my father, happily talking about essentially selling his daughter. Besides, it's unimaginable that the man would marry a woman he's never met. In today's world, such things should be impossible. Everything felt so unreal, or so I thought. Miraculously, it seems the sun actually likes your face. Be grateful. The moment my father said this with a smile, I was at a loss for words. He likes my face. I could hardly believe it. After all, I've always been told my appearance was deficient. To think someone would like such a face, I honestly thought he must be quite unusual. Is he desperate for a woman, or does he think anyone will be okay? Or is he planning to coerce me into something even worse? There must be some reason I can't think of any other explanation. Just as I was about to refuse, my father threatened, "If you don't listen, you can't stay in this house." And I ended up swallowing my words. Then I was more or less forced to sign the marriage registration. Watching this, my sister happily clapped and laughed. I resented my family and my inability to speak up more than ever. Thus, I ended up married to a man who can only be described as someone's son, with no clear idea if he really is anything remarkable. I was taken to a new home prepared by his parents and met him there for the first time. My husband Andy is 10 years older than me and has a reserved demeanor. He's not gloomy, but utterly devoid of vigor. I'm not in a position to talk, not being beautiful myself, but he didn't seem like someone I could have a romance with. Like me, he has a poor relationship with his parents, who said, "We are grateful he's leaving the house," thanking this marriage for taking him off their hands. Ah, so he's in a similar situation after all. Thinking this, a wave of despair washed over me, and I felt empty, as if we were just two burdens being married off to be gotten rid of. With these feelings, our new life together began. For the first month, we exchanged no words other than morning and evening greetings. We ate our meals separately, and I made sure we didn't meet around the house as much as possible. However, one day Andy suddenly started a conversation. "I know you don't like me. Weren't you also forced into this marriage by your parents?" I was indeed, but I hesitated whether to honestly say yes or not. Seeing my hesitation, Andy quickly understood and kindly said, "You don't have to say anything. I saw your photo and really thought you were wonderful. I think there must be some mistake. My sister is far more beautiful than I am. You don't understand yourself." I definitely felt something, and living together has only made that feeling stronger. Maybe it's because we grew up in similar environments. I really like your personality. Seeing Andy speaking so earnestly, I found myself unable to respond. Though his words bewildered me, his expression seemed sincere, not deceitful. Having never even been in love before, I was simply astonished. Is this also love? If it's painful for you to be with me, I don't mind if we get a divorce. I'll leave the divorce papers with you. But first, could we try to be friends rather than spouses? Andy smiled shyly. That smile briefly made my heart flutter, a fact I kept to myself. Confused by the notion of being spouses, his proposal to start as friends relaxed me slightly and allowed me to start seeing our relationship in a more positive light. After that, we began to have meals together. There were no set rules, and though I felt secure with Andy's personality, naturally, it took time to bridge the gap. Gradually, however, our conversations extended beyond mere greetings. As we talked about the weather and discovered each other's preferences, being with my husband gradually became less painful. As a result, we naturally started having meals together and watching TV together more frequently. Surprisingly, we both enjoyed reading, and we found many common interests. Above all, since we both had similar experiences with our parents, we shared many values and found comfort in each other's company. As we lived together, 1 year turned into 2, and by the 4th year, he proposed to me, and we became a true married couple. Is it strange to be proposed to when we are already married? Well, we were always a bit of an unusual couple, so there's no problem there. Having skipped the stages of dating and proposals, we started from scratch together. 10 years into our marriage, without any visits from our parents, we've been living fulfilling days, and even had a child. Just when I feel my life is still full of hope. On TV, there was news of a famous celebrity being arrested. Another celebrity was suspected of involvement in the crime, and it was the talk of the town every day. It was supposed to be someone else's affair for us as a couple. However, among those suspected of involvement, my sister Alice's name surfaced. She had been working as an actress, but I heard she had almost no work recently and was not active in the entertainment industry. She still had ties to her agency, apparently doing occasional work like extras. Despite never having made a name for herself as an actress, she was becoming known as a criminal. Photos of her, cozied up next to a famous actress at a club frequented by dubious men, had been captured. There was no official evidence of her committing a crime, and it seemed she had avoided arrest. However, the situation looked very much like she was involved. The person who leaked this photo was none other than a classmate of hers. This classmate had always disliked my sister, and it seemed that after casually spotting her at a club, they took a photo and sent it to friends claiming, "She's getting involved in shady stuff." It quickly spread from there. Then, someone sold the photo, sparking the current scandal. Even as her sister, all I could muster was a sigh. I thought it had nothing to do with me anymore. But suddenly, our parents showed up at our house. As soon as I opened the door, my mother, with tears in her voice, clung to me saying, "Leona, help." She looked on the verge of breaking down, and my father was barely keeping her upright. What had happened? My once beautiful mother was emaciated, noticeably thinner, her hair graying and unkempt. "What's going on? You say you need help, but I've already left home a long time ago. We have no one else to turn to but you. Why?" As I struggled to grasp the situation, my father said, "I'll explain." It turned out that my sister had been arrested recently. Being a little-known actress, it hadn't made the news, and I was hearing about it for the first time. As the saying goes, news travels fast. And it seemed her classmates had quickly got hold of this information. Despite not being in the news, the rumors had grown, and now the neighborhood was abuzz with tales of my sister's misdeeds. As a result, my parents were ostracized by the community, their home vandalized with graffiti, stones thrown at it, and they received nuisance calls. "We can't go back home. What has she done? It was a mistake to have her. You're my only child." My mother hugged me and wept. "So, can we live here with you? Let's get along as a family." What convenient timing to say such things. I slowly pulled away from my mother. "Leona, I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore." "Don't say that. We've always gotten along well, haven't we?" "That's right." My mother agreed. When I resisted, the two of them were bewildered. It was clear they were trying to appease me. "If you really cared, you wouldn't have let your daughter be married off like that. You might as well have sold me. But you're making it work here, aren't you? It turned out to be for the best, right?" I felt a surge of anger at my father laughing. "Ahaha." And I forcefully pushed him away. "Stop it. How can you say it turned out to be for the best? What if he had been a terrible person? Do you realize what could have happened to me? How can you laugh after doing such a thing? This family is not my family." I raised my voice, hurling my emotions in words. Before I knew it, tears were on the brink of spilling. Glancing to the side, I saw my husband quietly standing by me, gripping my hand tightly. Sometimes it's necessary to forgive others' mistakes. "Leona," irritated by my father trying to sound wise and placating me with a cheap smile, I finally said something I had held back for a long time. "Then let me say this. Why don't you rely on each other's lovers? You talk about needing a heart to forgive mistakes. Why don't you show me how it's done?" When I said this, they froze on the spot. Their faces turned pale, and they exchanged glances. Why? Did you think I didn't know? You both seemed to think it was a secret, but I knew all along. In fact, each of my parents had a lover. Both of them had assumed no one was aware of this fact, but I, and probably Alice too, had known about it. My family's relationships, both parent-child and marital, have long been broken. What part of this is a happy family? Were you cheating while I was still around? My mother screamed, her voice rising, and my father retorted, "You too." I watched their intense argument with cold eyes. Isn't forgiving mistakes important? Stop making excuses and just forgive each other already, I said mockingly, laughing through my nose, and they fell silent, unable to respond. Don't drag me into your petty quarrels. This has nothing to do with me anymore, so don't rely on me. The harassment and isolation from the neighborhood, it's all your own doing. Handle it yourselves. I vented years of accumulated anger at them. Then, perhaps admitting they had betrayed each other, they desperately begged me, "Please forgive just me." What a pitiful sight. Of course, I rejected their pleas and declared, "If you keep pestering me, I'll take this to the proper authorities." Though I blurted out about the proper authorities, I hadn't really thought about where exactly I would go. The police probably wouldn't bother with such matters. Well, maintaining a strong stance is key, haha. Whether my words had an impact was unclear, but they seemed to feel that I was serious as they slumped their shoulders and sat down weakly. "Let's go inside." Andy spoke gently, urging me to go back into the house. Prompted by my husband, I entered the house without a word. After a while, I could hear my parents shouting my name from outside, but I ignored their voices. About a month later, I learned that our family home had been set on fire. Whether it was related to Alice's incident was unclear, and no perpetrator had been found, but given the vandalism and harassment the dilapidated house had suffered, some malicious intent was undoubtedly at play. My parents both had affairs, but they never divorced. After the fire, my mother sustained minor burns to her face. Fortunately, her life was not in danger, but the scars remained on her face in an abnormal condition. Whether it was because of this or some other reason, one day my father silently left the house, abandoning her. She believed that he left because of her disfigured face, and she hardly ever left the house afterward. Since they both had affairs, it might have been more about reaching their limit than her appearance. However, the true reason is unknown to anyone. Even though my mother was unaware of the affairs, I believe I understood my father better. In fact, it seems that my father had been borrowing money from lenders and currying favor with powerful people for the sake of my sister Alice. Due to the scandal with Alice, he lost his job and now lives a life hounded by massive debt. Alice, having served 1.5 years in prison, appears to be struggling financially and is rumored to be in dubious videos. I hear she is mentally unstable, but to me, it no longer matters. The phrase "what goes around comes around" really hits the mark. I have decided to observe from afar how their lives will unfold. Meanwhile, I am busy every day surrounded by my 4 children. When the twins were born last, it was truly hectic. My husband and I, having only middle and high school educations, worried whether we could afford to raise 4 children when we found out about the twins. Nevertheless, we both worked hard to obtain qualifications. I work as a medical office assistant, and my husband works as a call center manager in a company that does not discriminate based on nationality or educational background. Studying while taking care of children, especially during pregnancy, was incredibly challenging. I am profoundly grateful for my husband's support during his busy job search and career changes. Though our marriage started under unusual circumstances, having a husband who actively helps with childcare and housework has been incredibly fortunate for me. With these thoughts, I even start to feel a bit of gratitude towards my parents. My husband not only cherishes our children, but he also treasures me like a lover. It's a bit embarrassing, but sometimes we enjoy dates just the two of us. We go to the movies or cafes, which might seem like teenage dates, but for us, who never had such moments in our marriage, they hold special meaning. We plan to continue cherishing each other and loving our family. Hoping for another happy day tomorrow, I savor each day as it comes. Is it time to reveal everything now? Yes, that's right. What are you talking about? Is that the secret we were talking about before leaving? Exactly. Don't you think you are just extra baggage in our lives? That's why we decided to sort out the unnecessary baggage. What? I don't really understand. Wait a minute. Take care then. Overcome the obstacles and live well. After throwing the bag out of the car window, my parents' car drove away. I was born with a disability and use a wheelchair. Unable to do anything, all I could do was wait for my grandmother, whom I was supposed to meet here. 2 hours passed, and as it got dark around me, I trembled with fear. About 30 minutes later, a car appeared. Myra, are you alone? I haven't heard anything from Michelle. What happened? Grandma. Seeing my grandmother get out of the car, I felt relieved and tears flowed. Seeing me suddenly cry, my grandmother was a bit shaken, but carefully helped me into the car and decided to go to my grandparents' house. In the car, I explained the situation to my grandmother as much as I could. What a thing to say. Why would they say such a thing? They said I'm just extra baggage in life, that it's time to sort out unnecessary baggage. That can't be true. When we arrived at my grandparents' house, I explained the situation to my grandfather as well. Of course, my grandfather was furious. My grandmother was also angry. However, as soon as I mentioned a specific topic, their anger subsided, and their expressions quickly returned to normal. My grandparents looked at each other and began whispering quietly. Myra is not a nuisance at all. Don't worry, you're safe. I wonder where the real nuisance is. Will you help us reveal the truth to them? Seeing my grandmother's confident smile, I felt reassured. I hadn't heard what we were going to start yet, but I decided to help my grandmother. My name is Myra. I am a middle school student, born with a disability that prevents me from walking, and I always use a wheelchair. I have a neurological condition that prevents nerve signals from reaching my legs. Living in a wheelchair, I face various challenges every day. A mere 4-inch step that my friends easily step over is a major obstacle for me. That's why I tend to avoid going out. It's not because I have unpleasant experiences outside, but simply because my home is too comfortable. How is it? Easier to handle than the previous doors, right? Yes, thank you. Now nearly all the doors in the house are sliding doors. Opening and closing doors can be a struggle when using a wheelchair. By the way, the handrails in the bathroom are quite old too. We might need to replace them soon. Pleased with the newly installed door, I played by sliding it back and forth. Next to me, my father was organizing tools scattered on the floor. He is a builder and has been making our home more accessible. He has installed sliding doors, made flat floor surfaces, and installed electric switches that are easy to operate from a wheelchair. As a result, the house has become so comfortable that it makes me reluctant to go out. If there's anything you're concerned about, don't hesitate to tell me. My father always encourages, but he has his own work, and it's hard to ask too much of him. Therefore, I have never specifically asked him to do something for me. Because I don't say anything, my father often proceeds with home improvements on his own. And every time he finishes, he tells me to speak up if there's any inconvenience, making me feel his kindness each time. However, no matter how much he scolds, I never ask my father for improvements. Part of the reason is that I don't want to trouble him, and also because my mother says, "The financial difficulties are because you need a wheelchair and I can't work. So don't insist on getting what you want." My mother often repeats, "We are poor." I first became aware of this when I was in first grade in elementary school, struck by the firm way my mother spoke. Though my father works on building projects, I also understand that doors aren't free. Moreover, the renovations he does at home don't bring in any income. I first realized this reality in the upper grades of elementary school, and I began to refrain from asking my father for renovations. Despite this, the renovations my father pushed forward have made our home a very comfortable space for me. My mother candidly speaking to me about our state of poverty is also perhaps part of her way of ensuring that I grow up without relying on others. I believed that I was loved by my parents, but I realized that this belief was because I was still young and didn't understand anything. From around the upper grades of elementary school, I began to understand my parents' intentions a little at a time. I thought I was loved, but it seems that might not really be the case. I'll load this baggage here, so please handle that one. Tick. This is always heavy and troublesome. I'm sorry. After shopping at the mall, my mother packed the purchases into the trunk, while my father helped me into the car. To my parents, I was just another piece of baggage, like groceries or daily necessities. Sitting in the car, I disliked looking at my legs and turned my gaze outside. I didn't want to be treated as baggage, but I couldn't argue because I kept causing trouble. At home, I'm treated as a nuisance by my parents. Why are you in the hallway? You're in the way, it's too narrow here. I was just trying to go to the bathroom. Bad timing. I always tell you to check where we are and act so you don't bother us. I'm sorry. Every time you move, you're in the way. I keep telling you to stay quietly in the corner of the living room. You're such a bothersome baggage. A stationary cardboard box would be easier to handle. Despite wanting to go to the bathroom, I was cornered into the living room by my mother. Having to wait to go to the bathroom to avoid being called troublesome baggage again, I decided to distract myself by focusing on a TV show I wasn't even interested in. Understanding everything isn't always a good thing. As I reached the upper grades of elementary school, I began to see my parents' true feelings. At that age, their cold words were too much for me to bear. Every time I was treated like baggage by my parents, it hurt. But as a grade schooler, I couldn't live without the help of my parents. Gradually, I started to gauge my parents' moods and tried to be as little of a nuisance as possible. Are you not going anywhere again today? Yeah, I'll just watch TV at home. That's a relief. I watched my parents leave for shopping from the doorway. They usually return around the time the evening drama ends. Not wanting to be seen as a bother, I started avoiding going out with my parents and stayed home more. When I decided not to accompany them, my parents would smile brightly. Seeing their smiles, I felt useful and would smile back. Looking back, my mindset at the time was quite distorted. For me, not being a nuisance was the top priority, and I mistakenly believed that my parents' smiles were the result of my efforts. I was satisfied with my efforts, but in the 6th grade, a small incident occurred that seemed to undo everything. Do you use a wheelchair at home too, Myra? Yeah, I do. But you know, my dad has made the house comfortable for a wheelchair, so I don't need help from everyone like at school. I'm totally fine staying home alone. As the grades progressed, my class changed in elementary school. Some kids weren't interested in my wheelchair, but during breaks, more people started to gather around. This became a new routine after the class change, and I was already accustomed to it. At this time, it seems I said something inappropriate to a friend. My friend relayed to a teacher how I was managing being home alone, which resulted in a call from the teacher to our home. If a 6th grader can't handle staying home alone, why should the school interfere? Exactly. Why did you talk about staying alone? It's caused trouble. I'm sorry. It seems my parents were warned by a teacher that it's dangerous for a grade school child to be left alone at home late at night. As a result, I was no longer allowed to stay home alone, becoming a burden to my parents once again. However, as an alternative to me staying home alone, my mother gave me a new directive. Go to an after-school day service program. What's that? My mother showed me a brochure for the facility. The brochure featured photos of children my age intensely engaged in studying or crafting something. The after-school day service seemed to be a facility that provides essential life skills and opportunities for social interaction. Simply put, it's like a version of a childcare program or a day service for seniors, but tailored for individuals with disabilities. Honestly, it's expensive and it's a burden to send you there. But as long as you use a wheelchair, your father and I can't support you forever. That's why I want you to make friends there, engage with others, and receive training so you can live independently in society. If I had been in the lower grades of elementary school, I might have felt that my mother was showing love. But now, in the 6th grade, I could somewhat understand the underlying meaning of her words. She probably just didn't want to keep me at home since I was a burden. Okay, I'll go to the facility after school and on weekends. Thank you for understanding. It really helps. Children understand and think more deeply than adults often realize. I pretended not to notice the real reason behind my mother's decision and continued to act as if I was unaware. My mother didn't realize I was acting and believed her words made me happy. Seeing my mother smiling, I felt a joy that I probably shouldn't have felt. A year after I started attending the facility, my parents seemed to be in better spirits more often. With me spending less time at home, I had become less of a burden to them, making their life seemingly more comfortable. Regardless of the reason, I started to feel okay with the situation as I was treated less like a burden by my parents. However, one day, my mother unexpectedly said to me, "You don't need to go to the facility anymore." Really? You're already a middle school student, and staying home alone shouldn't be a problem. I had already been attending the facility for a year, where I made friends. I started going there reluctantly on my mother's orders, but since I was often treated as a nuisance at home, the facility had become an important place for me. I would like to continue going there if possible. Okay, I won't go to the facility anymore. But I couldn't defy my mother, so I reluctantly accepted. As I stopped going to the facility, I ended up spending more time at home. Stay in the corner of the room, because you're in the way. I felt increasingly treated as a nuisance at home. I sometimes wished I could go back to the facility. I decided to subtly ask my mother if I could return. I got used to studying at the facility, and I can't concentrate at home. Isn't a place to study the same anywhere? I wonder what my friends at the facility are doing now. Why don't you contact them? You exchanged contact details, right? If not, you could call the facility and ask. From my mother's reaction, it seemed she was not considering letting me go back to the facility. Unusually, I expressed my dissatisfaction with her response. A few months later, my mother seemed to notice my sullen face and suddenly made a pleasant suggestion. "Myra, why don't you go out with your father and me today?" "Really? Where are we going?" "It's a surprise for when we get there." At that moment, I felt like this was the happiest event in all of my 13 years. A heavy bag stuffed with something was placed on my lap in the car. "What's inside this?" "Oh, no opening it yet. It's part of the fun when we arrive." "Sorry. I won't open it, so you can relax." The moment I tried to open the bag, my father, who was driving, suddenly turned around and stopped me loudly. Startled by my father's loud voice, I quickly apologized. As the car started moving, I excitedly enjoyed the scenery outside the window, wondering where we were going. After about an hour of driving, I realized we were heading to my maternal grandparents' house. We only see my grandparents once a year, and it had been about 3 years since our last visit, so my excitement grew even more. The road to my grandparents' house required crossing a mountain, and there was a rest stop with a large parking area where a small store was set up along the mountain road. Feeling tired from driving, my father decided to stop at the rest area, and he guided me out of the car. While buying juice at the store, it seemed like my parents were discussing something. "Mom just got a sudden urgent matter, and it looks like we'll be quite late." "That's troublesome. I wanted to get back early." "We're going to Grandma's house, right?" Are we meeting up here? Oh, Myra, you're back already. Don't startle me like that. When I addressed my parents, they momentarily showed a surprised expression but quickly returned to a serious face and said something shocking. Is it time to reveal everything now? Yes, that's right. What are you talking about? Is it that secret you were talking about before we left? Exactly. Don't you think you're just extra baggage in our lives? That's why we've decided it's time to sort out the unnecessary baggage. What? What are you saying? Wait a minute. While I was still trying to understand the situation, my parents returned to the car and drove away, leaving me behind. Wait. Incredibly, I chased after the car as it sped away, but to no avail. However, my panicked cries seemed to reach them, as the car stopped a little way ahead. Relieved, I slowed down my approach, but as I got closer, my mother leaned out the window and tossed a final farewell my way. Take care then. Overcome your challenges and live well, she said, as she threw the bag out of the window and the car drove off. Left alone in the mountains, I was too shocked to move for a while. After some time, realizing that standing still wouldn't help, I went towards the bag my mother had thrown. Picking up the bag and looking inside, I found it stuffed with clothes with an envelope placed on top. The envelope likely contained a letter, but at that moment, I didn't have the strength to read any message from my parents. Looking at a clock at the rest stop, I realized it was already evening, and dusk was about to set in. I wanted to call for help, but my smartphone had been left in the car. Eventually, I decided to wait in front of the vending machine, hoping my grandmother would come. 2 hours passed, and as it grew dark around me, I trembled with fear. Rustling sounds from the bushes, maybe caused by the wind, brought waves of indescribable anxiety. At that time, the only comforting presence was the light from the vending machine. Another 30 minutes went by when a car pulled into the parking lot. Myra, are you alone? I haven't heard anything from Michelle. What happened? Grandma. Seeing my grandmother get out of the car, I was overwhelmed with relief and tears flowed freely. Seeing me suddenly cry, my grandmother, though a bit shaken, gently helped me into the car and decided to head to her house. As we drove to my grandparents' house, I explained everything that had happened. It seems like Dad and Mom have decided to abandon raising me. What? To leave a child in the mountains, can such a terrible thing really happen? I had reacted the same way as my grandmother when I was first left behind by my parents. But that's what really happened. What a thing to say. Why would they say such a thing? They said I'm just extra baggage in life. That it's time to sort out unnecessary baggage. That can't be true. Oh, right. There was a letter. I didn't have the courage to read it yet, so I handed the envelope to my grandmother. She immediately pulled the car over to the side and began to read the letter. What does it say? It's written very politely that they can't afford to raise you for financial reasons, and they're asking if we could take care of you for just a little while. The letter said Louis was on a business trip today, and Michelle had to accompany him, so they wanted us to look after you for 3 days. But it seems they actually planned to leave you here much longer. Where did you find the letter? It was in the bag. I see. They didn't want to be questioned, so they hoped you would find the letter after arriving at our place. That's why they arranged it to appear after taking care of Myra. The reason you were scolded for trying to open the bag was because that was their intention. My grandmother's speculation seemed clearly correct. Just like her daughter. She understands my mother very well. After arriving at my grandparents' house, my grandmother explained everything to my grandfather. Upon hearing it, my grandfather became furious and said, "What a terrible thing. Myra, you never have to go back there. You're going to stay here forever. I won't ever send you back to them." Seeing my grandfather's anger, I felt this was true affection. It was entirely different from the feeling I had when I thought I was loved by my parents. I had always tried not to be a burden to my parents, but now I realized how wrong that was. I felt as if a curse from my parents had been lifted. It was an exhausting day with too many things happening. After arriving at my grandparents' house, I went to sleep without even eating dinner. The next night, feeling a bit calmer, I talked to my grandparents about my life with my parents. Being called baggage wasn't the first time yesterday. Why would they say such a terrible thing? Really, they told you to just sit quietly in the corner? What were they thinking? Each time I talked about my parents' actions, my grandparents' faces turned rapidly red with anger. My grandfather slammed the table in anger, spilling the tea. I felt a strange kind of joy that my grandparents shared my anger towards my parents. This was different from my feelings towards my parents, and I thought it was something I could safely embrace. However, when I mentioned a certain fact, their anger disappeared instantly and their expressions calmed down. I was really shocked when they told me not to go back to the facility because I had been going there for a whole year. A year at the facility. Yes, it was like an after-school program. I understand that, but every day for a year. Yes, I was going almost every day. Is there something wrong? Hearing this, my grandparents looked at each other and began to whisper. It seemed they felt something was off about my story. They explained things in a way that a middle schooler like me could understand. After hearing their explanation, I could no longer think of my parents as parents. What my parents called baggage meant that I was just an inconvenient accessory. Myra, you are not a nuisance at all. Don't worry, you're safe. I wonder where the real nuisance is. Will you help us reveal the truth to them? Seeing my grandmother's confident smile comforted me. I hadn't heard the specifics of the plan yet, but I had already decided to cooperate with my grandmother. It had been 3 weeks since I moved to my grandparents' house, and I was gradually getting used to life here. Today, my grandparents had taken the day off work, and we were enjoying tea together in a relaxed setting. As I savored the warmth of the tea, contemplating whether this peaceful life would continue, a loud voice suddenly echoed from the front door. The voice gradually approached the living room where we were. "Hey, are you there? What have you done?" My parents burst into the living room where we were sitting and started shouting angrily. They were so furious that they struggled to find the right words. Their faces were a mix of anger and panic, almost bordering on madness. My grandparents and I understood their state well, so we calmly continued sipping our tea without being disturbed. However, my mother's anger intensified, and she scolded us even louder than before. "This situation is going to cause us serious trouble. What are you going to do about it? Be quiet. We can hear you even without the shouting." My parents were taken aback as they didn't expect me to tell them to be quiet, and they looked at me, wide-eyed with surprise. Now free from my parents' control, I was in a position to speak my mind openly, a stark contrast to who I was when I lived with them. "Grandma, what is the current situation with Mom and Dad? Your actions have caused problems. We got a call from the city office asking if Myra was still living with us. The lie was exposed immediately." Nothing specific was said over the phone at that time, but this will definitely become a problem. It will be a problem, indeed. There's likely an investigation into fraudulent benefits going on. It's something that will come out eventually, even without us doing anything. "Why do you know about the fraudulent benefits, Mom?" While I understood that fraudulent benefits were a problem, the gravity of the issue was not fully clear to a middle schooler like me. My parents were sweating, beads of sweat on their foreheads, despite it not being particularly hot. Lewis had come to borrow money from us before because his job wasn't going well, remember? You said you didn't want to work and wanted to continue being a housewife, so we told him to get a job and turned him away. Yes, I remember that happened. I had always thought my mother said we were poor to keep me from being spoiled or asking for too much. But it seems they were genuinely in a dire financial situation. My grandmother had discerned that my parents were engaging in some sort of misconduct. "Why did you keep sending Myra to the facility every day if you were short on money? That facility costs over $10 each visit, doesn't it?" "Yes, we were struggling financially, so we kept sending Myra to the facility to help her develop social skills. But tell the truth, weren't you just trying to make your own lives easier by sending Myra to the facility? You stopped after a year because of money issues, right? Yes, we ran out of funds and couldn't continue with the facility. Is there a problem with that? There is a problem. Even after Myra stopped going to the facility, you continued to pretend she was attending to receive disability service payments, right? Grandma's point was spot on. My mother tried to retort but couldn't find the right words. The fees for the facility I attended were just over $10 per visit, as Grandma said. This cost is supposed to be covered mostly by the subsidy, which the users are responsible for. My parents had been fraudulently receiving these funds by lying about my attendance at the facility. Knowing you could still receive the disability payments even if Myra wasn't attending, you probably thought there was no need to keep her